Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on investigating elections put together by the Global Investigative Journalism Network. My name is Sheila Coronel, and I teach investigative journalism at the Columbia Journalism School. This is a crucial year for democracy worldwide, not least because very consequential elections are being held this year. We recently had an election in France. Next week, there will be a landmark election in the Philippines, which is my home country. Later this month, there will also be elections in Lebanon and Colombia. And later this year, there will be elections in some of the democracies that are under siege, among them India, Brazil, Kenya, and Tunisia. Around the world, free and fair elections face growing threats from disinformation, foreign interference, voter suppression, campaign corruption, violence, intimidation, and more. Fittingly, today is World Press Freedom Day. It is a time to honor and support journalists everywhere, especially those jailed, sued, attacked, and trolled for simply just doing their jobs. To mark that day, I'd like to introduce David Kaplan, who is the head honcho, the driving force, the moving spirit behind GIJN, to help us mark this day. Dave.
Thank you. Okay, good morning from Washington, everyone. Thank you, Sheila, my old friend and your colleague. I'm just going to take a few seconds to personally welcome you all on this World Press Freedom Day. This was started by the United Nations by a general vote of the Assembly back in the early 90s. To mark the importance of having a free and independent press worldwide. It's no secret to our audience that we're under attack almost everywhere these days, not just from lawsuits and physical threats, but from an onslaught of online abuse and harassment, as our one of our colleagues from Pakistan put it, that they're not trying to destroy journalists anymore, they're trying to destroy journalism. Well, they're not going to do it. We're fighting back, full of innovative ideas and great projects, cross-border collaboration, and the best tools and techniques that we can find. That's GIJN's job. It's the job of all these speakers here today who we're so grateful for joining us. So that's it. I just want to wish you all a great World Press Freedom Day. There are events happening worldwide today, this being one of them. So thank you again for joining us. We probably have people from 30, 40 countries present in the audience. So we are indeed all in this together, and we thank you for joining us. With that said, let me turn it back over to our esteemed host, Sheila Coronel from the Columbia Journalism School.
Thank you, Dave. So let's get down to business. So for a long time, we have been told that elections have been covered mostly as a horse race. We know that this approach to campaign reporting is even more inadequate today, as electoral systems are being weaponized and used to seize and dismantle the guardrails of democracy. Independent media and watchdog journalists have a vital role to play, to look into the money and networks of candidates and the many ways in which elections could be rigged through intimidation, through money, through disinformation. This is a difficult time to do this kind of reporting. Journalism today is a dangerous business, and we all need tenacity, planning, collaboration, good sources, and the latest tools and techniques. We also need to protect ourselves, our sources, and free expression itself, not to mention the facts and the truth which are under siege by anti-democratic forces. I'd like to introduce today's speakers, 4 journalists with extensive experience in investigating various aspects of elections. I will introduce them in the order in which they will speak, and I'll be very short. They will tell you more about their work. First is Craig Silverman, an award-winning journalist, author, and one of the world's leading experts on online disinformation, fake news, and digital investigations. He's a pioneer in this field, formerly with BuzzFeed, and now a reporter for ProPublica, covering voting, platforms, disinformation, and online manipulation. After him, Denis Tessou will speak. He's the head of the AFP Media Lab, where he leads a team of journalists and engineers developing new tools for newsrooms. Among many other innovations, he helped develop the Invid Twitter SMA tool to help elections digging. He'll show us that tool later today. Juliana Daltiva is a Brazilian journalist and a columnist for UOL news outlet and the author of a podcast, A Vida Secreta de Jair, The Secret Life of Jair, which revealed President Jair Bolsonaro's involvement in an illegal scheme to pay advisors' salaries when he was a federal deputy. Finally, we'll have Rowan Phillip, who's a staff reporter for GIJN and author of its Elections Guide for Investigative Reporters. He was formerly chief reporter for South Africa Sunday Times. As foreign correspondent, he has covered politics, corruption, and conflict from over 24 countries. Before we start, a little bit of information about the Global Investigative Journalism Network. For those of you who are not familiar with GIJN, GIJN is the largest global network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations. Currently, we have 227 member organizations in 88 countries. But GIJN works with journalists everywhere in both nonprofit and commercial organizations and with freelancers. It has an extensive range of resources and tip sheets to help journalists worldwide. You can check this out on gijn.org. GIJN just recently released its Elections Guide for Investigative Reporters. It's designed to offer a broad array of tools, techniques, and resources to help watchdog reporters dig into almost any election. You can check it out now on the GIJN website, or you will find a link to it in the chat box now. We also want to hear from you in the audience. Please send written questions and messages in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. When the speakers are finished, GIJN's Eunice Au will join us on the screen to moderate the questions. Finally, please note we will be recording this session for posting later on YouTube. So let's start. Craig, you've been covering this election disinformation for a very long time. Tell us what you're seeing in this cycle.
Thank you. Thanks, Sheila. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share some slides. So I want to talk a little bit about if you've got an election and you're thinking about covering it, and you're thinking about covering it from the digital aspect, thinking about disinformation, manipulation, but just also kind of understanding what the discussions are and what the topics are that are resonating with people. So how do you sort of set yourself up as an individual reporter, as a newsroom to do that? And then I want to highlight a few kind of trends that you could probably watch out for, and tactics and techniques that seem to be quite common or increasingly common when it comes to elections in different countries. So in terms of the sort of starting points, one of the first things that I think people should be doing is kind of building up a list of the topics, the candidates, the kinds of things that are contentious, that are divisive, that are extreme, that are probably going to take up a lot of oxygen during the election. These things, obviously, when we think about what tends to spread and get traction on social networks, it's often the more extreme stuff, right? And so you want to think about those issues, those candidates, also places, locations, notable races that you should be paying attention to. This sort of forms the basis of like, what do you want to be looking at? And then you can use that to do keyword searches and monitoring across the different platforms that are going to be of interest in your country for your election. So sit there and really think about what you need to be paying attention to. And this isn't a one-time exercise. You need to be adapting and doing this over time. Obviously, think about the platforms where people in your country or your part of the country or region, what are they on? What are the popular messaging apps? Is Facebook a factor or not? Is TikTok a factor? Is Twitter a factor? Think about where people are gathering and talking. Identify kind of big pages or accounts or groups around candidates, around topics, and think locally as well as nationally, depending on what your coverage areas are. And so now we have sort of like the keywords and the things we're paying attention to, and then we have the platforms, and you start to put those two things together to find those accounts, to find those pages, to find those groups where you can hopefully start watching them and monitoring them. And the key thing here is to be consistent about it. Checking them regularly, checking them daily, setting up alerts if you can, and also paying attention to ads that are running. I think oftentimes, of course, the content, the organic content that's spreading is really important, but also what is the paid speech? What are candidates and what are kind of entities paying for in terms of trying to influence discussion and people's views, as well as to gather data from people, getting people's emails and other things like that. Really big priorities for campaigns. And so as you're monitoring and as you're watching, what are you looking for? Well, you're looking for any coordinated activity. You're looking for messages, memes, images, videos, things that are kind of spreading quite rapidly, getting a lot of traction, things that might be seeming to move in kind of a coordinated way. It's also important to look for kind of new organizations that might suddenly crop up and start buying political ads, or start sharing videos that seem to have getting traction and that kind of thing. A lot of times what we see is there's the candidates and there's the parties, and then there are sort of arm's length operations. Maybe it's a marketing firm. Maybe it's, seemingly a nonprofit or something like that, that's really out there to do the more controversial stuff, to do the more divisive stuff, because the candidate themselves doesn't want to be seen as pushing that stuff out there. And in addition to all this, you want to think about, across platforms, don't just focus on one, think about where that content is spreading across them. Many countries, obviously, people speak more than one language, so think about how you can be tracking that. And then the final point, which I'll talk more about at the very end, is being careful about attribution, which is if you're going to point the finger and say, well, these videos were created and spread and linked back to this particular party and this particular candidate, we want to be able to reveal who's behind something, but we also need to make sure that we have the right evidence to do that. Otherwise, it undermines our work. So that's sort of, the starting point. The things you want to think about, and the key here is consistency and doing this every day and checking it regularly and adapting and building those lists and those things that you're monitoring. In terms of individual tactics and things to think about, one of them that's really grown, it's become very big and almost fully integrated into kind of the political process in the Philippines, but is really, we're seeing it happen in countries around the world, which is professional media manipulation or disinformation for hire services. And so you will have companies that describe themselves as a PR firm or a marketing firm, and they will be offering a range of services to candidates. Maybe they run a bunch of Facebook pages, and they can use those to push out messaging. Maybe they will come up with smear campaigns against the opponents and spread false or misleading content about them. Maybe they run a whole bunch of accounts and they can use those to attack supporters of an opposing candidate. When we did a report on this and we looked at the times that platforms like Facebook and Twitter and others had kind of attributed an information operation back to a PR firm or a marketing firm, we did see that there's been a big increase starting in about 2019. I think it's really continued. We see this around the world, marketing and PR firms selling these kinds of services, and their big moneymaker is elections. And to give you an idea of the kind of things they do, this was an example from a few years ago in Nigeria, where you had one Israeli marketing firm called Archimedes Group. They were actually running two Facebook pages. One was supporting a particular candidate, and one was also going against the candidate. And so in this sense, if you're playing both sides, let's say you're hired to support a candidate. Well, if you run a page that's sort of opposing them, you can start to learn about the audience and the people who are actually interested in opposing your candidate, and you can gather data and insights about them. And so this is why you might want to play on both sides. And so what you see, on the surface of these pages is you might think these are genuine support or, genuine opposition pages, but a lot of times behind the scenes is a professional operation. And the more we can reveal those and expose them, I think the better it is for fair elections. Some of the things that we've seen in other countries, this was in India, where BJP, the current party in power, they had a very sophisticated operation where they recruited many people. They were paying them to do things like tweeting, to do things like pushing out certain messages. And this was all coordinated through kind of a central app. And these tweets are from somebody who was kind of working as part of this and who was upset, because they felt, they were promised jobs, they didn't get the jobs. And so this is something that we're seeing more and more, where parties are really trying to organize mass groups of supporters, some of whom are paid, some of whom are not. They use them to go after the opposition. They use them to push out their latest content, their latest videos. So pay attention to these kinds of mass mobilization operations. Pay attention to accounts that are tweeting the same thing, and try to talk to them and see, are they paid? Are they real supporters? And try to understand that. What we also see, of course, is parties. There's a wide range of policies, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or WhatsApp or what have you, things that they allow and things that they don't. And there are always, whether it's the party or the sort of arm's length supporters, people who are violating these policies. Oftentimes, they haven't registered as an official political advertiser, and they're running ads and trying to get away with it. And so what we see happening a lot is the abuse of digital ads, the abuse of platform policies, and that can be obviously an opportunity to do a story about the job that these platforms are doing, either well or poorly, in these areas. And the example on the left there, talking about payola, which means people being paid to spread messages on TikTok without disclosing that they're actually sponsored posts and sponsored content. This, I think, is a really big thing we're seeing. We're seeing more and more campaigns and agencies hiring influencers, individual people with big followings, to push out the message. And a lot of times they are not disclosing that they are paid. And this was a problem in sort of the midterms in the Philippines, where you had paid influencers, sometimes with relatively small number of audiences. This guy had 77,000 followers at the time. And you can see he's like mostly posting kind of thirst trap things. He's an attractive guy. It's him with his shirt off all the time. And then all of a sudden, he's posting a bunch of support for a senatorial candidate, right? And so this is the kind of pattern that you might watch out for. An influencer who has content nothing to do with politics, all of a sudden, boom, they're talking about a particular party or a particular candidate. Along with the apps and the sort of tasking, the example in India, we see a lot of people using WhatsApp, Telegram, Line, depending on the country you're in. This is a great way to really get propaganda and disinformation out to supporters, because they're in groups. You get them in there, and it's hard for fact checkers to see and detect this stuff. And this has been obviously a huge thing in Brazil and in other countries. And then the last couple of things I'll note is just increasingly we see during elections agencies, parties pretending to be media. So in this case, in Mali, they pretended to be fact checkers. Okay. And then, in the US, there's a whole rash of what seem to be local news sites, but they're being run either by campaigns or candidates or political action committees. And they look like news websites, but they are actually, completely partisan entities. And so you have to pull back the veil and show who's really behind it. And, for journalists covering elections, you should pay attention to news sites that come from out of nowhere and are suddenly, publishing certain types of very politicized content. So just to wrap up, I mentioned the caution on attribution. If you're going to say a candidate or a party is behind a certain thing, just be aware that, even the platforms who can see a lot of data behind the scenes, they make mistakes when they point the finger. So like these two examples here are, where Twitter had pointed the finger and said, well, these accounts were linked to China or what have you. And in some cases, they got it wrong. So we need to be cautious about that as well. You can have evidence and messaging that seems to be supporting a particular candidate, but you can't know just based on that the candidate or their campaign is behind it. Again, parties will often use now marketing firms, PR firms, things at arm's length to have that as, a way to conceal their activities and say like, the PR firm may never say who their ultimate client was. And then the last thing is just, you can have people with completely different motives. They could be genuine fans, they could be paid to do this, they could be professionals, or they could just be in it for the money. And their content can look exactly the same. And this example I often show from 2016 in the United States, on the left-hand side, we've got a bunch of false headlines that appeared on sites run by young men and teens in North Macedonia. And they were purely just doing this to earn money. And then on the right-hand side, you have a similar kind of content on Facebook, but this was actually run by a couple of guys who were being paid as part of a Russian operation. And the content looked the same, but the motivations and the people behind it were different. So please keep that in mind. You see the content, but that doesn't necessarily tell you the motivation. So just to recap, you want to plan ahead. You want to find those topics, keywords, candidates, and things to look at. You want to be systematic about it, looking at things daily, adding and removing pages, accounts, things as you start to understand it. You're looking for patterns, popular content, suspicious engagement, new entities suddenly entering the fray. And you need to be there looking at this stuff, again, really in a coordinated way. So, the last thing is always never underestimate the importance of human sources. I mentioned before, talking to people who are supporting and putting out content, asking them why they're doing it. You need to develop human sources and not just examine the stuff that is on the digital platforms, because that's the avenue for you to start to understand the PR firm behind it, who is paying, and that kind of thing. So that's it for me. Hopefully, as sort of a starting point of things that you can be looking at, and some of these trends that you probably want to watch out for elections in your particular country or region.
Thank you, Craig. That was really an excellent summary of the increasing professionalization and sophistication of media manipulation operations. And you gave some really, really important tips on how to report on them. One thing, though, that I see is lacking is, you can trace who and who's posting, what's being posted, the messages, the memes. But how do you report on the impact of media manipulation and disinformation operations?
Yeah, so one part that I think journalists have sort of come to know and do is to look at sort of the engagement, obviously, around content. And that can also be really difficult. I mean, you don't get stats from WhatsApp, right? You only know something's been forwarded a certain number of times when you see it. And so, that impact of like talking, the engagement of the content you're seeing is one part. And then also, I think you also want to pay attention to the influence of the people spreading it. So something may get, say, a lot of views, or another thing may not get a lot of views, but it's actually being promoted by the candidates themselves. And that, that messaging from elites, that has tremendous impact. And then, I think the final thing, which is often overlooked in this type of reporting, is absolutely to try and center the victims or try and center the people being targeted with this disinformation. So can you find communities of people where this disinformation has really taken hold, and it is influencing their decisions? It's influencing their engagement with friends and family. And so I think you can take the macro look and look at engagement and look at those stats as much as you can gather them digitally, but then also think about who are the people that this message is trying to reach, and what impact is it having on them? And can you tell the stories of those people in those communities in ways that other people can actually relate to? Because we relate much more to fellow humans than we do to stats and numbers.
So, which leads me to my next question. This seems to be like the new normal for election campaigning now, is really media manipulation operations or audience sentiment manipulation operations by all sides, right? There's kind of like everybody is doing it because it gives them, either gives them the advantage, or they don't want to have their opponents get the advantage. So it's like nuclear warfare. It's like, what do you call it? It's like you have to build your arsenal of disinformation to counter the others. So what does that mean in terms of a newsroom covering elections? Does this mean shifting resources to covering, the air war, the disinformation war, and less on the ground war, campaign rallies and political parties and so on?
Well, I mean, look, this depends on the resources you have in your newsroom, right? If you are a very small newsroom, you've got to pick your spots. You've got to pick what your specialty and what your focus is and what is going to serve your audience best. You're 100% right that we've just seen these tactics become really kind of default. And actually the Philippines is a great example, because when Duterte was doing this stuff back in 2016, he was condemned by a lot of the other parties. But then you get to the midterms a few years later, and a lot of the other parties have started to inch toward doing this as well, because, to your point, they feel like they can only compete if they're doing the same thing. And maybe they won't run fake accounts, but they'll certainly pay people who are supporters to push stuff out there. And so you have a degradation of the media environment, the information environment, as a result of this stuff. And so I think for a newsroom, it would be a huge miss to not be paying attention to this stuff. But you've also got to think about, in your newsroom and in the skills and people you have and in who your audience is, what is your best strength and what should you be focusing on? But I do think it is hard to just say, we're only going to cover the sort of traditional physical world of the campaign and the polls and the events and ignore the digital, because they are really interwoven and you're going to miss pieces if you can't figure out how to put the two together.
One last question. What impact does exposure of media manipulation actually make in reforming the actions of political actors and in, detoxifying the information space?
Yeah, so I mean, the effect of media is a tricky one. I mean, academics have been looking at this, and it's really hard to say this person saw a bunch of disinformation and they voted because of that, right? Because a lot of things can go into a decision that a person makes. I think one of the things that we do have a decent handle on is that, you know, when the elites, when the candidates, when the parties engage in this stuff, you know, that definitely has a big effect because it normalizes it. And what the elites are doing, you know, what the big candidates are saying, and then they're of course getting covered for that starts to really pollute the environment. So I think the big impact is if the candidates and the parties themselves embrace this stuff, then you start to see far more impact than if it is kind of purely arm's length. If the candidates are out there doing sort of more traditional campaigning and not going in this direction, it's going to have less impact. But, you know, unfortunately, people think that it works and they feel they have to do it. And so we do see that elite messaging from it. And that becomes a really big challenge for journalists because it usually goes hand in hand with trying to undermine legitimate reporting and trying to attack and harass journalists.
Thank you, Craig. I have so many more questions for you, but I'll save them for the end of this panel. Next, I'd like to ask Denise to speak. You know, we're talking here about the algorithmic manipulation of public sentiment, and maybe is there a way? Can we find algorithms or algorithms? And Denise will talk about the tools that he's built for the AFP newsroom and for others. Denise, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for your kind invitation to participate in this webinar. I'm going to share my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Satchel network analysis, which is a new tool that we have developed within the WeVerify European project. Okay, so I guess that most of the audience knows already about the InVid WeVerify verification plugin. That's a toolbox that we launched in 2017. You have the details here. I will share my slides just after the talk. And the plugin is freely available on the Chrome Store. It has attracted more than 70,000 weekly active users in 224 countries. And we just got plus 10,000 more users after the launch of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and you can see that even some of the Eastern countries are getting into the top 10 to top 20 countries using the WeVerify InVid WeVerify plugin. So only North Korea so far, as far as I could look, is not using it yet. So we come from InVid, which was about video analysis in Video Veritas. And here is a very recent example from last Saturday from my company AFP in Philippines, fact-checking a doctored video from the poll in the presidential elections there. And you can see here that the plugin was used to debunk that fake video. So we are still known for this kind of video analysis, but in fact, within the next project, which was WeVerify, so InVid ended in December 2018. And in the next project, WeVerify, we developed a new tool for, several new tools, but one especially for social network analysis. And here is an example which was published by AFP Factual in French and by the de facto French Disinformation Observatory, which is another European project here in France. We published this story, which was a kind of transphobic conspiracy theory targeting the wife of President Macron. And sorry, I went too quick. And you can see that this same story, when we look on a longer time period, it was it went very high in terms of sharing, and it went viral in December, but after it went down and within the election, which ended on 24th of April, it was getting rather low. So it seems that the debunking have had an effect on this particular campaign, which was based on an hashtag. I'm going, for the interest of the international audience, to switch to a more international example, which is the Stop the Steal So going back to end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, when we look at the Stop the Steal during the before and after the Capitol riots, we still find on Twitter quite a considerable number of tweets here, with generating a lot of retweets and likes. And so our tools is able to retrieve on keywords, on hashtags, on URLs, or even on domain name to retrieve a corpus of tweets. And this corpus of tweets is analyzed automatically. And we propose you a series of graphics that you can download or embed into your fact checks or use into your investigative reporting. So here we have a timeline. All those tools are completely dynamic. That means that you can zoom inside those tools. You can look at details. Every node is clickable, and you can look at the corresponding tweets and investigate all those metrics from the network. So when we are investigating, for example, conspiracies about elections, like the Stop the Steal, we can automatically extract the most retweeted users, most liked users, most active, most mentioned. Every segment of every pie here is clickable, and you can get back all the corresponding tweets. So it gives you the higher part of the network. And we have also a neat map of tweet distribution that is aimed at trying to find coordinated inauthentic behavior, or even to identify bots when you have repeated patterns of same kind of content repeated at regular time interval. And on the bottom right, you can see a bubble chart of the top 100 most active users, which is a combination of the activity with the top 100 most active users, and with different colors here. When you have big bubbles in red, for example, that means that those accounts have been posting more than 14 tweets per day on the same topic, on the same hashtag. In orange, between 5 and 14, and below 5 tweets per day in blue. The size of the bubble show you the amount, the volume of tweets which have been posted. Each node is clickable, then you can see the corresponding tweets. You can zoom inside this graphic to see some particular time period, for example. On the x-axis, we have the account creation date with the purpose or the aim to try to detect whether some disinformation, some fakers have been creating some specifically some accounts to launch a disinformation campaign. So it allows you to detect these kind of things. And on the y-axis, we have the number of followers, which help you to see immediately the potential impact that one disinformation campaign may have, and whether it has been retweeted, for example, by accounts with a large number of followers. In the same tool, we also have a series of graphs, so dynamic graph again, based on the corpus on the query that you have made at the beginning. Here we have the co-reference hashtag graph. That means that we are listing all the hashtags which are present within the corpus, and you can see the relationship. For example, here the most the largest number of co-references is between MAGA and Stop the Steal. We have another one which is about Stop the Coup, for example. So we have people which are against one disinformation campaign, others which are backing, supporting this disinformation campaign. And this co-reference hashtag graph allows you to find out all the hashtags within this corpus, and to try to find out whether disinformation campaign may be launched with other hashtags, for example, or trying to integrate different kind of discussions on Twitter from those hashtags. On the right side, you can see another a bit more complex graph, which is a socio-semantic graph, which is showing the top 20 hashtags shared by the people in this corpus, the top 20 shared URLs, the top 20 mentions, account mentioned, the top 20 quoted retweets, top 20 unedited retweets, and top 20 replies. The idea here is to help you to try to find out which are the accounts which have an impact, the most impact, but also what are they doing, who are they targeting, what are they sharing in terms of links, what are they quoting in terms of retweets, for example, what kind of propagation they are actively supporting. And this is a tool for exploration, so you can zoom inside the graph. Each node is clickable, and you can see exactly the tweets, the corresponding tweets between the different nodes which are linked together through those edges. We have also the possibility to export those graphs into a Gephi format, so that you can perform for data journalism, for data journalists. You can reuse the graph directly into Gephi if you want to have a broader picture of the whole graph. Finally, we have also all the shared URLs within the corpus and this word cloud here, where we extract all the vocabulary. Each word is dynamic, so you can click on each word to get back the corresponding tweets. So you can explore the network as well through the content and the salient vocabulary inside that network. Apart of graph, I just wanted to share very quickly another tool that we made also in another project called NVZ4 from AFCN, which is CheckGIF, which is a new tool for revealing image forgery. So that's a forensic tool. Here I just put an example. Sorry, I went a bit too quick. The example is from a picture from a fake picture from Hunter Biden, which was shared by Eric Trump, saying it was a fake, but it was a lovely one. And here you can see that you can just by taking the link from the social media, the suspicious or fake image, and another image, the original or supposedly original image, retrieved from the web by similarity search on search engines. You can build a GIF which reveals all the manipulation which has been made to that image. We use a mathematical program which allows to supersede exactly the images and to reveal exactly all the forgeries inside the image. So here, for example, and probably you don't see it at the screen, but you have, for example, even a website which is on the pencil. And so all these little forgeries, it looks like a bit the classical 7 errors game, and it reveals all the forgery undertaken by the image. On the right side, you can see the original image that gave us the idea to make this CheckGIF tool, which is the president of Slovakia in Europe, and with our counterpart from Czech Republic, Mr. Zeman, and a mood was altered with Photoshop, so it is a much more subtle modification, alteration of the picture than on the left side. And you can see that this one is quite difficult to see when you get those kind of pictures, and the CheckGIF allows you to reveal what kind of forgery has been made on the image. And finally, just to share that those latest OSINT tools are reserved to fact checkers, journalists, and researchers. And for that, to access those tools, you need to, to register first. And after, you will get the possibility to give your email, the same email that you used to register, to get back a token to be able to access those tools. Our purpose there is to avoid misuse. And to avoid also, to keep scalability for scalability issues, and to avoid misuse, we prefer to reserve it to fact checkers and journalists, and obviously to investigative reporters. And thank you for your attention. If you will want more information, you can look at us on Twitter, for example. And here is the consortium that made the WeVerify project, which is now over since end of last year.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That is an impressive list of tools. So if people want to get access to them, I believe the URL has been posted on the chat box, right? It's weverify.eu /verification hyphen in, yeah?
That's
Okay.
directly in the plugin. So that directly in the plugin, you can register directly by clicking on the advanced tools. Please just put the email, your professional email, if that's possible, because as we really want to reserve this to journalists and fact checkers, it's much more easier for us to know if you qualify, if you are registering with your professional email.
I have one question for you, Denise, which is the importance of video and images. Are you seeing that a lot of the disinformation operations are really focused on visuals, on imagery rather than text?
Yes, yeah, sure. Since already several years, most of the disinformation now is backed at some point by memes, by images, decontextualized images, forged, altered images, and videos, obviously, yes.
And are they also much more, is that because they're much more shareable and effective?
Yes, but I think that people trust more what is visual. So that's when you want to back some kind of propaganda and disinformation, if you have some visuals, that's also a way of being more viral, because we know that posts on social networks with visuals tend to be more shared within the networks.
So one last question, if the fakery is exposed, do people take notice? I mean, there are some questions now about whether verification or fact checking even matters if people are much more wedded to narratives rather than to individual images or facts or untruths.
Yes, normally we see a lot of content which is withdrawn from the networks when they have been declared false. We see more and more about the platforms also suspending some accounts which are their behavior is against their terms and conditions. So we see a lot of content also removed by the people who try to disinform, and that's something that's I guess it is making some impact. Maybe one of the most important issues, which is not completely addressed, is the fact that sometimes disinformation is also indexed by search engines. And sometimes and we tell also in schools to teenagers, for example, to use reverse image search. And reverse image search sometimes index also the false content. And so we still have some, I guess, some issues there to keep it clear that some content has been debunked. Of course, maybe the debunked content is not seen as much as the viral fake, but still, that's in a matter of knowledge, that's important to have at some point publications like fact-checking organizations just stating that this particular content was a fake.
Thank you so much, Denise. Our next speaker is Juliana Daltiva, and she will talk not so much about the information war, but the war on the ground and how you use shoe leather reporting in investigating elections. Juliana, thank you for joining us today. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself, Juliana. Yes, there.
Hello to everyone. Good morning. It's an honor to be here to talk to you. And Sheila, thank you for saying my name correctly and even the name of the podcast in Portuguese. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, thank you. As I was saying, when I was invited here to talk, what I thought that I most have to share with you all is kind of a methodology, a way of thinking, because one important part of covering elections is try to understand the candidates, especially the presidential candidates. So this is like the first question I asked myself while I was covering other elections before the past one we had in Brazil that was about Bolsonaro. But this is one question we can all ask. Can you go to the next screen, please? And after you try to understand, ask yourself, go to the basics, to ask the first questions you have to understand about this person. You have to think about who is the public person of the candidate, who is the private person. And one important thing I always asked myself for the past 4 years, trying to understand and investigate Bolsonaro, was like, do not make the mistake of thinking you already know everything about the candidate. Even if, like Bolsonaro, for example, is in Brazil's public life, political life for the past 30 years. So he was someone who we here were used to see, to hear, but we actually haven't any idea of who he really was behind the scenes, in the backstage, with his family. If you can go to the next screen, please. So after I got like realized we had to go to the basic with Bolsonaro, like who he really was, and think about everything about his life, public life and private life. And I just like organized myself between these 4 points. If you can go to the next screen, please. And I started asking myself, how long have I met him? Have I interviewed him? What do I know about him? And start writing down, like in a piece of paper, a few key points to try to ask myself if I know these questions, the answer of these questions, and to understand him, and putting everything about him around to ask the questions and the answers, and try to find ways of getting these answers. If you can go to the next, please. And one key point about Bolsonaro was his family, and even in the government before the campaign, his family was something really important. And it's important to ask, where do this person came from? Who are the parents? Where was the candidate born? Is this person religious? How many times this person was married? For example, Bolsonaro was married 3 times. And in this criminal case we are covering here, he involved everybody of his family, his 3 wives, the 3 oldest sons, and many other people he had in his life during the time he was on Congress. So these answers were really important. But many things I discovered while I was investigating him, I didn't report it, all of them all the time. But I got the knowledge. So sometimes you have to investigate things, even private things, to understand the public figure. But sometimes you're not going to write or report everything, but you have to know. If you can go to the next screen, please. And while I was like trying to understand the public figure, then the family, one important thing for this criminal case and for his life, for Bolsonaro's life, for example, was to understand how he got the assets he has today, and how long and where and when he got his houses, his lands, and even his family, because he had nothing before he was a politician. And while he was on politics, he started to buy a lot of things, and his sons did pretty much the same thing. So you have to ask yourself, if this person, the things this person has today, where do they came from? Does he have other ways of getting money? Is he a businesswoman, or is he a businessman, or is she a businesswoman? So you have to understand about him, about his family, and about his history, his trajectory. and do the very old advice, like follow the money. You know, you have to understand how everything that he or she has today got into place. If you can go to the next screen, please. One very important thing you have to be aware and pay attention a lot is about the staff, the supporters, and even the opponents and the enemies. Because like sometimes one person starts on a political life with some supporters, advisors, and then for many different kinds of things, these people start fighting and separate and got even opponents or even enemies. And these are important people for you to interview, to understand these separations, these fights. And even when you go very behind after closest friends from the childhood, these people know a lot about how this person got, not even to politics, but to an adult person, what was important and what changed. You can understand the personality. It's what I'm saying for the most is trying to build a profile of these candidates and to understand backstage. And one important thing also is many of the things that I'm saying are not simple things. You're not going to do this like for one day to another. So what do? I usually take like a year before at least to start to ask all those questions and build. If you can go to the next screen, please. And to draw a visual scheme. And one thing I showed to Rowan before was the spider. If you can go to the next screen, please. This one is like a beautiful one, but in the next screen I have a one that I draw with my handwriting. If you can go back, just for us to for me to understand, to explain a little bit more. What after you answer all these questions, and you're not going to do this like one day to another, you have to do this on time. You have to go to events just to observe. Sometimes not even to report. Nothing very interesting is going to happen, but you have to watch. You have to be there to see how people get along, who are the important people for the candidate in daily basis, every day. Sometimes are not the ministry. Sometimes it's someone who is serving coffee, someone from the security system, someone, a friend, or many people. And if you're not on the ground watching these events, these campaign events, or in our case, for example, he's still president, so he has an agenda for the presidency. If you're not on these days, you're not going to observe how are the relationships and who are important, who are not important. And you don't have like small talk with these people, because sometimes you're not going to get like a huge scoop on one day, but you have to build the relations. And one thing I did a lot was sending messages to everybody I could under social media, phone, and sometimes I use it to went to the houses and sent notes when someone was not home, or maybe didn't even want to talk when I said that I was a journalist, because I don't do cover job. I always present myself as a journalist to be very transparent what I'm doing. And sometimes I got, after like months, I got answer to these notes and to these messages. And I built a database about many people who knew Bolsonaro from different kinds of places and positions, not just around his life, his private life, but public life. And when you do, and if you can go now to my Spider-Man handwriting, when you do this kind of thing, you like make a map, sort of a plan, and you never end this. I never ended the reporting this image. Like there's always a next story, another something I left because I had not enough information to report. And what I did with my podcast was like reunite many of the stories I did for the past 3 years, because the podcast was launched last year, and got some new information that I could finally make the big picture, the big report about not only the criminal case that involves Bolsonaro's sons, but about him, how he was involved in everything this, and about his life, how everything was connected. And I'm sorry that I don't, if you can go to the final screen. And you can, now we can, you have my email if you want to ask anything, but I do have a small part of the podcast with subtitles in Spanish, if you think it's okay. I just don't have it in English, but if it's okay, I can put it like for a minute. But we can do it in the end also if you prefer, but this was pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. We're kind of short of time, so I'll ask you one question, which is, how do you get Bolsonaro's friends and those very close to him to speak with you?
I think with a lot of dialogue. So sometimes these people were very had an idea of a journalist, especially a woman journalist. So I started talking to I tried to do like a pre-interview, sometimes just for a coffee, just for this person to understand who I am and know that I'm not an enemy, not even an opponent. I'm just a journalist trying to understand who Bolsonaro is. And what I usually say to my sources is the transparency. Like, I'm going to ask tough questions. And you can answer or you cannot answer. It's up to you if you want to or not. But I'm always going to talk to you with respect and with dialogue. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to understand. It seems pretty easy to say, but it really works when you actually prove while you are doing the interview and while you're talking to these people. They understand and they feel confident to talk, even when you do like very hard reports. Some people don't talk to me, of course, but some people even respect me more after seeing that it was transparent and the things they said gone. I haven't hidden anything or made any manipulation. They felt, no, I can talk to this journalist.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be other questions. Let's move on to Rowan now. And thank you for that, network map, the spider web. That is a really good one to follow. You provided us a template for how to investigate candidates. Rowan, I would like you to round out all that's what been said and fill in the gaps here. You wrote this amazing manual on investigating elections. The link is here on the chat. So Rowan, give us your take.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, so I interviewed about 15 experts for the guide who suggested dozens of tools and techniques that are listed there in those 5 chapters. But here I thought I'd just share a few of the broader strategies that jumped out to me from these amazing journalists that I reached out to. Andrea, could you share the slide? Thank you. So, okay, with about 170 countries hosting national elections, many of the databases and tools in the guide really supplement primary local sources and databases on election rules and which change all the time, even locally, and campaign finance, things like that. So one important tip I thought that I got from the National Democratic Institute was to tap a commonly underused resource, which are these really amazing non-partisan citizen election monitoring groups around the world. You know, everything from young lawyers associations to community groups who really have surprisingly detailed knowledge in what should happen and what isn't happening. And NDI tells me, you know, they are rarely reached out to by reporters. Secondly, I'm not sure why, but tracking the actors behind false election robocalls is one of the toughest technical challenges out there for investigative reporters. There seems to be no great tool, but sources do say that crowdsourcing is at least a great place to start, and certainly how to identify the targeted groups for these robocall campaigns, inviting your audience to, you know, tell you what about the odd calls and texts and false claims they get ahead of elections, possibly with a dedicated WhatsApp number, and especially collaborating with other newsrooms, potentially with the same WhatsApp number as the Comprova project did in Brazil so successfully a couple of years ago. A rising threat is these robotexts. Now, robotexts tend to be regulated in many countries, but campaigns are getting around these bans on text auto dialing with these AI-driven peer-to-peer political texting platforms. And some campaigns use these mass texts to mobilize supporters to rally to a particular polling place to intimidate voters of the opposition. It's really something to watch. I thought that trusting news was really persuasive when they say that when you're investigating a species, a type of wrongdoing about one party and not another, you do need to explain why, and to do so really prominently. They recommend putting these sort of why we reported this story explainer boxes high up in your copy or in your broadcast, and even include short video clips of the reporter explaining why they pursued the story. It makes a difference. Juliana spoke about backgrounding, but then there's impact, and you know, it was compelling listening to Amanda Ripley, a wonderful journalist here in the States, who is insistent that in polarized societies, of which we see, you know, increasing volumes, infographics are just essential in election investigations, partly because research shows that voters don't like to be told what to conclude from political data. They like to feel like they're discovering the truth for themselves. And it also allows you to get into more complexity in the story that accompanies the graphic. So infographics, absolutely critical. Don't get bogged down debunking falsehoods. You know, fact-checking organizations around the world, from First Draft to the AFP network, I've really matured now, doing a great job debunking. So it's really freed investigative journalists up to track the people behind it. There were also great tips on self-censorship. A great tip from Lina Atala in Egypt is for reporters in sort of autocratic countries and what they call hybrid democracies to report as if their countries are full democracies. Kind of almost pretend. And the reason for that is it prevents self-censorship, because oftentimes you might think, well, I'm not going to report on this, you know, this corruption, this low-level thing, because there's just going to be no accountability to this, for this official who's a friend of the president. There's going to be no arrest or firing. But it's important to prevent self-censorship and also to keep the bar high for these repressed audiences, to keep the spirit of the flame of democracy alive, literally. On search, it struck me, watching these OSINT experts searching for clues about voter intimidation, how even these experts really use these basic search tricks like keywords with and or and in combination, and they keep trying rather than the advanced tools and Google Docs that they're experts in. I particularly love the Henk van Esse's around trick, where you can find a connection between a candidate and a person of interest or a donor or a thing by putting the word in capitals around between them with a number of words in an average sentence, like 17 in parenthesis next to it. Juliana spoke about human sources. And I wanted to mention that time management is so critical. Sort of elections involve these hard deadlines with masses of data. And so there really are some great tools out there to reduce your time burdens, not just the auto transcription apps for your interviews, which really are incredible things. But check out the security behind them. We have a resource on that at GIGN. But also the apps like Klaxon that alert you to any changes that happen automatically on election-related websites, and setting up Twitter lists. And we provide some great ways to find those Twitter channels. Next slide, please, Andrea. So yeah, sources told me how corruption follows election trends, like a sudden increase in costly digital voting systems in the Baltic countries and Eastern Europe, some of the younger democracies, even as some established democracies are now going slightly back towards manual voting systems out of concerns for hacking. But these, particularly the biometric technologies, are apparently especially prone to sort of dodgy procurement deals. And of course, there's a public service element as well, with voters needing to understand these changes. I was also surprised to learn, Sheila, how the biggest volume of election hacking involves these simple DDoS kind of denial of service attacks on official sites. And more importantly, my source told me that the real danger here is not the hack, but this erosion of trust in the election process, where voters might see a frozen site and wonder if the whole election is somehow compromised. Also, it does seem to me certainly odd that deepfakes have yet to affect an election. We've seen lots of cheap fakes, but that doesn't mean that deepfakes won't, and the bomb might drop this year or next. Craig pointed out to me that deepfakes can be fairly easily challenged through traditional reporting, just showing a candidate wasn't at a certain place, but that they really present a real threat, within 48 hours of election day, where there simply isn't enough time to find the easy evidence to disprove it. I think it's worth watching how new anti-democratic election-related laws are whipping up dirty tricks, are whipped up around dirty tricks, and sort of these really blatant falsehoods. The classic one for me being the law requiring driver's license to vote in the US state of Alabama a couple of years ago. And then partisan officials closed the offices that issue those driver's license in Black neighborhoods. It was, so using an unethical sort of pairing an unethical strategy with a duly enacted law. And finally, if I have 2 minutes, Sheila, I wanted to just mention the challenge of investigative impact in elections. So in 2008, March, Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe was defeated by the pro-democracy MDC party, despite old school tactics, right? Like ballot stuffing and blatant sort of voter intimidation by police. So in response, Mugabe asked his Central Intelligence Agency for a new strategy that would guarantee that the opposition lost the runoff election in June. And then thanks to the conscience of one intelligence officer in Harare and a very brave intermediary, I was handed a copy of the reply of the document that the agency sent to Mugabe for what they were to do next. I was a reporter at the Sunday Times then. And that intelligence report listed 200 key opposition activists and recommended that a new unit, effectively a hit squad, be established and mobilized to eliminate the people on this list. I then found a source who traveled around the country and visited almost every morgue in Zimbabwe and identified many of the individuals on this list in those morgues, including a very heroic guy called Tonderai Ndira, who was kind of seen as sort of Zimbabwe's Steve Biko. So we ran the story saying that, Mugabe's government had disappeared 200 opposition activists to steal the runoff election, and Mugabe didn't even deny it. Yet the scoop had almost no impact. The only accountability for Mugabe was that the African Union denied him head of state status at the AU summit in Egypt that year. That was the sole consequence for my story. Basically, he wasn't allowed to ride in the motorcade. So the obvious impact problem was that we published the story after the election day, right, after the runoff, but also because we didn't, with hindsight, I feel that we didn't collaborate. We didn't join forces with radio and broadcast and other media. And also we didn't stick with the story. We didn't, in follow-ups and digging into who, this hit squad and who they were. And, as we point out in the guide, in 2013, the next election, Mugabe then switched strategy to the autocrats playbook, right? So now avoiding the old ballot stuffing techniques and the public beatings and going and outsourcing violence to these gangs, to street gangs, inventing public enemies, demonizing minorities, and using repressive new laws to change the playing field. And we list a whole bunch of those tactics in the guide. But lastly, Sheila, even comprehensive investigations have impact problems. I'm thinking of the New York Times piece on the Trump business empire a couple of years ago, a magnificent, comprehensive story that nailed, the story from every angle, but it didn't move the needle on impact, on accountability. And the impact problem there, of course, was this toxic polarization in the electorate. So, just to wrap it up, from speaking with the sources I have, the big takeaways in terms of impact are, from Navalny's people in Russia, make your story a video if you can, a viral video if possible. The impact numbers are exponentially greater than text. Certainly use infographics wherever possible. And really, trust other media, even rival media, with sort of radical sharing and collaborations where you can all publish and broadcast at a joint deadline, because it's really hard to claim bias when everyone's saying essentially the same thing about wrongdoing in a campaign. Thanks. That's me.
Thank you, Rowan. Those are very good tips. Engage audiences, share information, collaborate, but also watch out how the techniques of election theft, if you can call it that, are shifting from one election to another. That it's a continually shifting playbook, as you call it, that autocrats and others are using. We have just less than 15 minutes to go. So what I would like to do now is to ask Eunice to take over with the questions from the audience, so we'll have time.
Okay. There are so many ways and angles to tackle investigating an election. So one of the questions is, for small regional media newsrooms, what should be the must cover topics during elections? Like, what is the most crucial to investigate if there's lack of capacity? I guess everyone can answer this. Shall we start with Juliana?
Hi there. Is that okay? You're listening, right?
Yep.
I would say to focus on something, because it's very hard for a small newsroom or regional newsroom to take like for the biggest newsroom that needs to do the kind of reporting that I do, and even what Craig said, like you have to be in both ways, on the ground and even analyzing, especially the social media. But the small rooms should focus on something, should maybe elect a few topping points to work during the year, organize as many as they can before the elections, because if you try to do everything, you're not going to do anything. It's a very difficult subject to cover, even with lots of resources and lots of people. So I would I once worked in small newsrooms, and for example, I have been doing these investigations on biography of, for example, in one, I think for one past election, I decided to investigate the titles and the courses and the degrees that the candidates had. This was one of our main subjects, and we discovered that many of them lied about degrees and courses that they never studied or never finished, but they used it to say that they had those degrees. So this was a very important story in the end, one of the most important stories during the campaign. So you have to choose. It's difficult, but it's better.
Craig?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely echoing that. It's like you have to pick priorities. And one way of thinking about the priority is, you know, if you are a regional outlet, what matters most to the area, to your community that you're covering? What are they most concerned about? What is the topic? What is the, you know, proposal that is potentially going to have the most effect on people? And if you start with that and you think about what they care about and what can affect them the most, and you work backwards from that and say, well, then what most do we not know about this? What is the thing that is unknown that we, by putting some of our reporting muscle behind it, could reveal or could make more accountable? Then maybe that's, you know, one pathway for doing it. But absolutely, you have to choose, and thinking about what is most important for your readers and your community is a good place to start, and thinking about what you start to choose.
And Dennis? You have to unmute.
Sorry, forgot the mic. Yeah, I would add, I mean, just a couple of topics that link to what just Craig said as well, is identifying polarizing topics in your community. So all the topics that are likely to be used for disinformation. In many countries, that's migration, for example. And also identify probably the main platforms, the platforms used by your local journalist community, and the platform used by the voters as well. So in Western countries, for example, we have a lot of journalists on Twitter, and we have a lot of voters on Facebook. So it's identifying both polarizing topics and the main platforms, and try to stick with that.
And Rowan, do you have something that stands out? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, for local media, I mean, already local media are better than national media, because in the sense that they do less horse race reporting, and they dig into real issues much more in election cycles. And so they can take advantage, I think. Someone suggested to me that in an election cycle, local reporters can think of themselves as foreign correspondents, and that just dropped into that town. But then also take advantage of these wonderful human sources that they've developed in their beats over years. And, you know, really kind of drill down into the stuff that affects people's, you know, lives every day.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for Juliana. Are there any specific tools that you use to create the spider web or keep track of election candidates' connections? I know we mentioned a tool in the guide itself, but maybe you would like to share a little bit more.
You have, in many of the questions I did, we have different tools you can use. For example, for family, to discover the relations, who's cousin from who, not only like for the wife and sons. Facebook, right? Facebook is everything is on Facebook. So everybody's over there, and we use it to have better tools for Facebook. When I started to investigate this, we had some tools that we could that are not working anymore, but you can do it inside to find some of the things that it's not as good as it used to be, but you can find many things about family over using Facebook and even Instagram more than Twitter. for family. Here we have, in Brazil, we have assets, for example, our law obligates that the candidates make statements about their assets every election. So it's a public archive. You can, and we have this on paper and we have this online. So we can actually, I can send the links later, but we can use over there that. But what I do is usually go also to the public records that we have in the cities. For example, I don't know if is someone from Brazil or from someplace else, but where ask yourself where, when someone buys like land or house, where do this person register this kind of negotiation? For here, it's obligated to it's by law obligated to register in a public record. So these documents are public, and they're here. They're not free, but they are public. So we can ask the copy of these documents, and you can like make even you can even check if what the candidate is saying to our Supreme Electoral Court is correct, or if they're hiding something. We usually do this every election. And we have some tools here to make connections between like our number of social security number that we can use, but there are specific tools for journalists, and we find relations between persons and companies. I can actually send the links later, but for every question you ask on that, when I showed in my presentation, you have a different kind of tool that you can try to use. And you have to ask yourself, where is this information in your country?
Thank you for that. And I think for visualization, you use Flourish. That's mentioned in the guide. Next is for Craig. Someone asked this: journalists are usually not trained in cyber investigation. So should they train themselves in social media management or web design? Or could you provide a few examples of tools, apps, or learning platforms that they can go to, train themselves?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think the election guide that Rowan has produced at GIJN has some great tips and some great tools for you to look at. So I really encourage you looking at that. The other one that I'll point to, which is also free, just like GIJN's very comprehensive guide, is the Verification Handbook for Media Manipulation and Disinformation. So this is a book series that I edit for the European Journalism Center. It's completely free online. It's also been translated into multiple languages. Thank you for dropping the link there in the chat. So that gives you a grounding in investigating social media accounts, investigating websites, verifying images. So I think that, if you go through that, and if people on your team are reading that handbook, we have case studies as well as the sort of hands-on advice, and then also reading this elections guide. I think that's great. Last one I'll mention is First Draft, which is an organization that's been mentioned before. They have some free online training tools that you can take. So if you want to learn a bit more about, verifying images or other things like that, they've got some great resources for you there. So if you go through this election guide, if you read the handbook, if you do some of the stuff and read what's at First Draft, I think you'll find that you've got a pretty decent handle on a lot of this stuff. I think having some increased understanding of, cybersecurity, understanding more about the function of websites, those things are useful, but you don't have to be super technical to do this kind of work. I'm not a computer programmer. And so I think a lot of it is really about the mindset that you bring. You have to understand how these social networks work. And yes, understand basics of websites, but then think about the information you're trying to get. Think about looking for patterns and approaching that. So it's less technical. It starts with mindset, but then an understanding of some of the basic approaches, and those free resources will be good for you.
Thank you so much, Craig. We don't have much time, but I do want to squeeze in one more question that maybe Rowan and Dennis can both answer, and one last one for Sheila as well before you close out. Okay, so this one is for Dennis and Rowan. Most of the tips offered here are about investigating elections that are around the corner, but election processes are usually often much longer. So what would the speakers say journalists should keep in mind while covering an election cycle when its start is a few years or months away? Dennis, shall we start with Dennis first?
Okay. Well, I would say that you have to be aware of the polarizing topics well before the elections. When you take, for example, migration, disinformation, it's almost all the time. That's between elections as well. And at the end, you have some parties and often alt-right parties while providing some kind of solutions, as they say, about migration problems. And this kind of sociological propaganda is long-lasting. That means that some elections laws that we have, for example, in France, are not very effective, I think, because they are just focused on the campaign on the last 2 or 3 months of the electoral campaign. And in fact, this kind of sociological propaganda is all the time. And sometimes it's higher when it's it comes to the elections, but it's not it's never ceasing. I mean, it's always there. So that's something that we need to be aware of.
Thanks, Rowan.
Well, one of the first things to do at the beginning of the cycle is to identify 3 key election officials and exchange phone numbers with them, because they're way too busy to respond to your calls close to the time. And they'll have that sense that they know you. Another one is to, Nancy Watsman suggested to me to start picking out and just copying down some of the dog whistle, phrases and jargon you hear from these, from some of the extremists and some of the political activists on either side, and drop them into a spreadsheet for Boolean searches closer to the elections. So you really have in columns these different phrases you might not have thought of before when you're doing those searches. And finally, as something that Craig mentioned to me, that you really, use your audience as your eyes and ears, and sort of take the democratic spirit into your investigation, right? Where you can literally ask your audience, especially local media, what else would you like us to dig into? What else would you like us to find out for you? So your audience is a tremendous resource, especially in election investigations.
Wow, really packed with great tips here. And Sheila, last question. You witnessed the heart and the fall of the Marcos dictatorship, and now you see his son preparing to dismantle what's left of Philippines democracy. So what is the role of a good journalist today when they see democracy failing around them? And are you going to apply any special techniques in your own coverage of the Philippines election? Okay,
that's a tough question. I think, looking back, I think what journalists have failed to do is to show the rise of them, is to trace the rise of the Marcoses, and to treat them, in every society, there are geographical, class, demographic fissures that impact on which candidates run for public office and the kinds of rhetoric and appeals that political parties made. We should have seen the Marcoses coming to power. We didn't take it seriously in the 90s. We should have looked seriously at their machine, their resources, etc. Elections are a long game. Elections don't just start during the election campaign. They start from the ambition and power and resources that are available to people. So I think I would look at that as part of a long game. Secondly, what impact do we make? I don't know that we make much impact very late in the election, but I think our role is to guard the integrity of the process. Our role is to show the forces that are behind candidates for public office. Our role is to show, to shine the light on disinformation, although we may not have much impact on that. But finally, I think if we don't make much impact now, we have to be still the witnesses and watchdogs. And we have to record it for history so that when people look back, they will learn from the mistakes that we've made.
Thank you. Sheila, you want to round it up?
Yes, so thank you, everyone. This has been, for me, a very insightful and really learning experience. I hope it's the same for you. For those of you who are going to cover elections in the next months and years, please be sure to check out the GIJN guides. This webinar will be available on YouTube, and you'll all be getting a link to it. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel, for sharing what you know, and we've learned a lot from you, and happy Press Freedom Day, everyone.